Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about stuff, and today we'll start the Wheel of Time read through. Specifically, obviously, The Eye of the World. So I'll be ranting about the first 10 chapters of The Eye of the World today, which means there will be spoilers for those first 10 chapters. I barely remember anything but very broad strokes from the rest of Eye of the World, so I suspect I will not spoil anything beyond that. If that is not true, I'll really apologize, and I feel sorry already. Anyway, so, prologue and chapters 1 to 10. That 10th chapter is leave taking, so I figure that's a good point to drop off for tonight. Let's get started on it, shall we? Cheers. Alright, so, where to start and where to go with this? As I said before, I want to look more at like prose and stuff in this one, not so much as at themes, which is pretty good because there's none really in this first part. Or it's so slow moving that it's difficult to do that. Anyway, my point is, we start out with a prologue, and obviously it's something of a given at this point that Eye of the World is heavily inspired, to put it mildly, by Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, specifically the Fellowship of the Ring at this point, or general Lord of the Rings stuff. I'll come back to that in a second. However, there's more to that, and I want to focus on something else here, because the prologue is very much not Lord of the Rings. It's very much not that. It is, however, very close to something else, and that makes a lot of sense. And that something else being the more like pulp side of fiction, of fantasy fiction, of weird fiction. Specifically, the kind of stuff that, say, a Robert Irwin Howard would have written or would write. And the reason for that, why I think that is very much appropriate here, is that Robert Jordan, before he actually started writing Wheel of Time, spent his time writing Conan pastiches, or further Conan the Barbarian stories for Thor books. And, you know, I've never read one of those. I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to Conan or Robert E. Howard or any of those kind of things, so I have no idea how good he is at writing Conan stories, but he's certainly, like, the whole opening scene in that palace, with all the devastation, the way it is written, the tapestries, the kind of words, the kind of prose he uses, that is still heavily influenced by the kind of stuff that you would read in something like the Weird Tales stories by Howard, or maybe even Clark Ashton Smith. And as I said, that makes a lot of sense. And one thing where we see that is the more direct kind of thing, right? When whatever that guy's name is shows up, the evil guy, I've already forgotten him, he's something Betrayer of Hope, whatever, that dude. When he shows up and grandstands and does evil laughter and all the good things that evil guys and dark sorcerers are supposed to do, that's something that is very much not Lord of the Rings. Really not Lord of the Rings, or not Tolkien at all, and we'll talk about that in a second. It is, however, very much appropriate for pulp stories, your Robert E. Howard's kind of stories. Those evil wizards always do the thing, which is grandstand, tell all the plots, mock, do evil laughter, and do, like, bad guy posturing. Which, you know, kind of makes sense, because other stories where that happens are like detective tales, your special agent kind of James Bond kind of thing. That is a group of literature that kind of grew out of the pulps originally, so it makes a lot of sense that that is in there. And it is sort of the main thing you see in that prologue, which, as someone who really likes reading Robert E. Howard and things like that, I do approve. I mean, it's not gonna make me love the book immediately, but it's something I can connect to and enjoy. It's like, yeah, this is cool. There's a lot of mass murder at the beginning, someone's cursed, there's an evil black wizard. Let's go. Time to see those mighty thews in action, sort of. But we don't, because, you know, then there's like a volcano and whatnot. And we start with the actual story. We have a few quotes there, you know. You're like, mystical claptrap of, like, supposed sources of the history or whatever. And then we get into it. Those quotations are something that we've seen in books like Dune, and once again, Robert E. Howard, the famous "Know ye, O Prince, that before the drowning of," and so forth, drowning of Atlantis, and the rise of the kings of Arius, and so forth. You know that kind of thing. That hopefully know from the Conan the Barbarian movie, or from, I think it's the Scarlet Citadel. I think it's the Scarlet Citadel where that supposed excerpt from the Median Chronicles is put in front of the story. So, once again, this is not exactly a Tolkien thing. So, The Eye of the World is far more than just a Tolkien ripoff so far. So, let's continue with the actual story we have, and this is sort of where the Tolkien thing comes in, because we got a black writer, and black writers are something that is very Tolkien. Now, it is still far more, but we have something that is a staple for fantasy fiction, or was a staple for epic fantasy fiction for a long time, and can be laid at the feet of good old John Ronald R. Tolkien. That is the whole farm boy kind of thing going on. And this is obviously something that we see here in that first part of The Eye of the World heavily. The whole two rivers thing, being hearty folks, being very hardy folks, being brave, but also very pacifist and living at the arse end of nowhere and trying to not have anything to do with the world outside is very much your Shire kind of thing. It obviously is something that you also see in, say, the Sword of Shannara, which also starts with, are they called Omford? I think Omford, Shay Omford? Are those the guys in that first Sword of Shannara book? I think they are, but it's been 15 years since I read that one. But you also, that trope of the farm boy from the arse end of nowhere who is forced into the wider world. And, well, Robert Jordan definitely tries to drive that home a lot, and it can become tedious. Which is, I guess, the next point where we need to talk about the prose before we get into more plot details and stuff. The prose issue here is, once again, Jordan's prose is far closer to Robert E. Howard's pulp kind of prose, and I think it's part of the reason why a lot of people tend to find this very plodding, very tedious to get through. The reason there is that when we look at prose today, it's you have the whole show don't tell kind of thing. Howard, I need to stop doing that. Robert Jordan is very much tell don't show. Obviously, Tolkien is also very much tell, don't show, but he does it in a different way because Tolkien's prose is inspired by something else. Howard and most of the other pulp authors, especially someone like H.P. Lovecraft as well, do a terrible thing, and that is front load a lot of descriptions. You barely have the idea of there's a tree. No, that tree has also to be gnarly, blackened, age-worn, and a ton of other adjectives that are usually mostly put in front of your actual word, thing that needs to be described. As I said, it's something that you see a lot in those kind of stories. It's just the way pulp prose, adventure prose in the 30s was written. I'm not saying it's bad or it's good. I'm saying it's what was done at the time. It can feel, however, very heavy, plodding, and tedious today because it's not how most authors write today, unless they specifically try to emulate that specific style, which, as I said, can feel outmoded and a lot of other things today. Tolkien, on the other hand, does not do that as much. He uses adjectives, but he doesn't do it that much. He also tends to go in a more oral style, because that pulp style with all those adjectives is very much a written style, a almost Baroque style of description. You have very complicated sentences that are very difficult to imagine anyone ever speaking in, real life. Tolkien's prose, however, is much more oriented, because he's inspired by mythology and oral storytelling, is very much more about, it's still descriptive and very much tell and show, but it is very much sparser in that regard. There's not like 10 adjectives and then a noun. It's also often not front loaded but back loaded. It's like there's a tree and it is described, and then there's like one descriptor after it. That's sort of how Tolkien writes his prose. He chooses his words more carefully. Now, once again, I know that a lot of people are a bit intimidated by Tolkien's prose or think that it's boring or plotting or whatever. But as I said, it feels different from how Robert Jordan writes here. That is definitely one thing that I wanted to put out here. This is, while picking up tropes and ideas and themes, I've said themes, no, but while picking up all these elements from Tolkien, it does not pick up the prose. It's basically The Lord of the Rings as written by Robert E. Howard. At least in bits and pieces here, at least at the beginning. Now, there's obviously more to come into this, and this is where we're going to go next with these first chapters. Other elements, real-world elements. Now, we are going to look at world building and stuff for a second here, or the little world building that we have so far. We have the Two Rivers place, we have one village, and it feels a bit like the Shire, but what we notice right from the beginning is that some words that are suspiciously like stuff from our world have been pulled in here and have been used here, unlike, say, with Tolkien. First one, obviously, is the Spring Feast, Beltane. Now, there's obviously a ton of ways to pronounce that. I'm not going to do any of that. You people, unless you actually study Celtic languages, probably don't know either. My point is, there is, if you use a word like that, that is not just like Spring Feast, which is probably what someone like Tolkien would have done, or, you know, but if you use a specific word like Beltane, you are you're taking all the words associated with that, because it's a specific name in a lot of ways that Spring Feast, which is just a descriptor, is not. And he does that, and he picks up other stuff like that later on when that Gleeman, who is obviously, your basic wandering bard kind of guy, talks about what he will talk about. And he talks about King Arthur Pendrag, and that is suspiciously close to everyone's favorite English warlord of the 6th century, I guess. And there's more stuff like that. The Arthurian associations, the Celtic associations are here. They're pretty on the nose in a lot of ways. Like when Moraine, what a name, like G, well, G is missing, so she's not Morgaine, but you know what I mean, uses the Angreal, that is just missing the S for the Sangreal, the Grail. There's tons of these, like, it's almost our world kind of feels to it. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. I remember when I first read this book, it's definitely something that made me really angry and pissed off, because I'm like, couldn't you just, like, disguise those things a bit more? I mean, everyone and their dog is borrowing from, like, Arthurian legend. That's fine up to a point, but maybe at least put in the extra effort to actually, find new names and don't rub it in that hard. I'm not sure if I still feel that way, because there's another possibility, which I'm obviously just like guessing here, but like, if this would be far in the future of our world, and there's like a connection, like whatever, parallel dimensions or whatever, you could argue that those elements have drifted through time, space, or whatever, to the world of the Wheel of Time, just like slightly distorted. I could live with that explanation. However, so far we don't have that. So let's just think that the Green Man or Green Knight and Morgaine or Moraine and Beltane and the Sangreal, that is only an Angreal, are just, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt here and not calling him super fucking lazy. Well, however, we need to do that when we're talking about the whole Tolkien bit, right? So we have Black Riders that do even behave like fucking Nazgul there, right? Like the whole idea that you have that Dark Rider showing up and doing, evil staring and whatnot, and then stopping on his horse when, Rand is dragging his dad through the forest, and then the horse is smelling him, and then the rider is almost smelling him, but then he fucks off. That is just so close to it. But once again, I've read sort of Shannara, so it's not that extreme yet. And there's other bits and pieces like that. Obviously, the Sangria, the Murdral, the totally not Nazgul, can also fly because he's using I have forgotten what it is, flying thing. Oh, a Drakkar, which is obviously hopefully not connected to, your old Viking ship kind of Drakkar. I mean, it's spelled differently, so I guess we're safe here for the time being. But then again, we will see. Now, that whole bit is obviously very Tolkien on the nose. And I know there's more of it. That's sort of one of the things that I remembered. I'll just not get into it because we have not spoken about stuff like Lan's background and shit like that yet. We will see. So we have influences. We have the Arthurian bit in there. And there's more of the Arthurian bit with Morgaine coming from... I mean, there's a city called Camlan, which, is very Arthurian in name. Then there's Tar Valon, which could just be Avalon, I guess. If you want to go all Arthurian on me on that one, which is sort of where the Aes Sedai, however you pronounce those people, live and whatnot. So it could be Avalon. We'll find out. So we have a bunch of Arthurian legendary. We have a bunch of Lord of the Rings. We have the whole yin-yang kind of thing that is still very much in the background with the Wheel of Time and the weaving, whatever the wheel is weaving. I think we need to talk about general fabric creation and stuff like that for a while because wheels usually spin, but not my point right now. So we have those two influences. The third one is obviously Dune. We have those quotes at the beginning, and we have the Aes Sedai as a group of women that are wielding power, a order of women that are feared and maybe respected, but definitely feared. And also, where people have a lot of conspiracy theories about the Aes Sedai moving, like being the power behind the thrones. Obviously, that sounds scarily like Dune and the Bene Gesserit. I mean, I'm not the first person to point that out. I know. I just still feel I need to point it out because this is me talking about the books and not someone else. And I have managed to watch very few videos or read very few reviews or whatever on The Wheel of Time because I want to do this my way. So assume that I have not really watched any of the other stuff here. It's just so bloody obvious, isn't it? So we have Dune meets Lord of the Rings meets Arthurian legend told in the prose of Robert Irvin Howard and the pulps. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, maybe not. There's a few things that I need to talk about before we move on for today. First of those is pacing. Or something like pacing, not really pacing, but escalation, I would call it. Now, I said before that this whole first start of our peaceful heroes, or heroes to be, or heroines to be, are about to leave their very backwater homeland, peaceful homeland, to start into adventure. Do the thing that Joseph Campbell always wanted them to do. That kind of thing. Right? And they have to flee because of some vague but overpowering threat. And that's all fine and good, but that threat escalates bloody quickly. I mean, you start with they see a rider. Next thing you learn about, they're just actually taking down the house and burning and killing people and looting the entire village. And that escalation of threat, or level of violence and whatnot, in the first part, this is I'm 19% into this first book, we have already raided an entire village. and people have died and stuff, puts us to a point where it's very difficult to imagine how to, pile on the threat level. And this is a slow book. This is like a 30-hour audiobook, 29 hours and a bit audiobook. This is a 500 and something pages, almost 600 pages printed book. And we're like 100 pages in, and we have already raided a village and so forth. You look at something like, say, Lord of the Rings. The threat level rises really slowly, right? We have the whole first part of the Fellowship is something else. It is slowly building up. There's the whole meeting with Gandalf telling Frodo. That's like already the second chapter, The Shadow of the Past. And then they leave, and they don't even actually speak or encounter the Nazgul. They see the Nazgul wander about. Even the first time the Nazgul raid a place, which, if you wanted to draw those direct parallels, would be, the city, the village of Bree, where the Nazgul show up and raid and then run off. And even there, we have not yet met our orcs, which you may want to compare to the Trollocs. No, the first time an actual Nazgul draws an actual blade against someone is the attack at Weathertop. That's just one it's a bunch of Nazgul showing up and whatnot. And then we have one more battle until the end of the first book of Fellowship of the Rings. And that's, the small, encounter at the Ford of Bruin in Loudwater. I think Loudwater is the translation into English. That part. And that's it. Nothing else in that first book. So the tension is rising much slower. The first time we meet bloody orcs in Lord of the Rings is in fucking Moria. That's that's way later. And that's the first time we have an actual fight and battle scene, large scale battle scene. However, here we start in chapter 5, we already have a village raided, or it's chapter 6, something like that. That's fairly early on, which makes it very difficult to then escalate further, unless you want to put out whole large scale army kind of scale encounters and battles beyond that. Now that's fine, but it means that at some point, unless you really have your first big 10 dragons versus 20 dragons battle at the end of this book, it'll start to become really repetitive, or you need to fill out those encounters that are more battle-like with a lot of descriptions later on, which is exactly what happens, right? Because one thing that Robert Jordan tends to do is describe stuff in minute detail. And generally, I don't mind that. However, it gets a bit tedious from time to time because a lot of those descriptions are very much without meaning or pointless. It's I get why, at the scene with Rand, at the house when those Trollocs entered the door for the first time, he's picking up the boiling water, and you make clear that the water is boiling fiercely and it's super bloody hot, and then he has to put on a bit of cloth around the grip so he doesn't scald his hands. And then we get the description of, yes, that also the warmth or heat is seeping through that grip almost immediately. And it's yeah, I get it, Rob, I get it. That water is bloody fucking hot. So of course when you throw that into the face, it'll burn. And I get it, but it's it gets repetitive relatively quickly. Especially since, once again, lots of those descriptions are, as I said before, front-loaded in his, front-heavy, I would say. Those sentences oftentimes are very front-heavy, and that makes it very, once again, repetitive for me. And, we'll see how this continues in the next couple of chapters, but you could certainly cut out a lot, or I guess a more modern editor would cut out a ton of just not useless, but meaningless description. This is all very fine description of if you want to know how a farm works and how to handle a farm. I get that, but you'd never catch someone like Joe Abercrombie write a book like this. That's what I'm trying to say here. And you'd probably never catch someone like J.R.R. Tolkien write that kind of book. Not even Robert E. Howard, who used the same kind of style of prose. This is just very, very much about like bloating the page count at this point. So there we are with something that I find already a bit more problematic. I mean, not problematic, but difficult to swallow is what I try to say here. Next thing, world building wise, re-bloody-ligion. Now, I'm obviously someone who always focuses on religion. So far, we haven't seen a lot of it. Everyone is just saying, light be fine, light save us, and so forth. That is a bit weird because apparently we have like no actual religion in this world. There's like just like light and dark. The evil power is very much personified with someone named Shaitan, which Shaitan, however you pronounce that, is eerily Islamic in like choice of name and stuff. Is that a problem? Not in itself. We'll see how that continues in future. But to pick an actual the actual personification of the devil in Islam and set it against the light without any personification, it feels a bit odd. Like, if you have like everyone believing, you'd still need some sort of rituals and shit like that. But apparently you also have like more pagan rituals like Winter Night and Beltane and dancing around maypoles and stuff like that, which it feels for a world that seems to be developed so thoroughly, this seems to be a bit weird. Another thing that I found difficult is the meaningless description or details of the village of Emmonsfield. Maybe we will return to Emmonsfield in later books. I have no idea. But at this point, we get like all those characters and all that stuff that is like who's behaving what way. We have our grouchy Ted Sandeman kind of old Sandeman, young Sandeman, and so forth kind of characters in that village. But there's like detail in there that is not really needed for like anything later on. Once again, maybe stuff will have any like actual like impact or meaning on the story later on, but right now we just get a picture of like a village that has everything a village has. Grumpy people, not so grumpy people. Yeah. And we get it, like everyone is a bit like far out of the way. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. It's something that I felt was like when they come into the village for the first time in chapter 1 still, I think, or maybe the beginning of chapter 2, when I keep forgetting his name, jumps out and is complaining about the village wisdom, which once again I guess is sort of like a pagan idea of like a wise woman kind of thing, naive anyway. And that guy's like, yeah, he's complaining, but he's also apparently his whole like family is lazy. We're playing with cliches, right? He's complaining, but he's also not doing the thing that all those ideal villagers are doing, which is cleaning, spring cleaning, and the wives doing the cooking and the washing, while the husbands, the men, are doing manly tasks like rethatching the roof, or at least clambering around up on the roof where they could actually fall down and break their necks, because men need to take risks while women need to do house chores. Kind of thing. No, they're like lazy because they're like the bad guys kind of things. Like, for something that is supposed to kind of be the gateway book or threshold between like very old school fantasy and more modern parts of fantasy, but it's still very, very firmly into like really conservative cliches. I mean, not even Tolkien's description of the Shire is that on the nose in that regard. But I guess I said that before. Tolkien is a bit more subtle in what he does. Robert Jordan is not a subtle writer. He's very much the kind of writer that drives stuff home with a mallet or a sledgehammer is what I'm trying to say. All right, what else should we look at before we leave it for tonight? Depiction of women. Now, I know this will be something I will get back to again and again and again. And I'm obviously not a woman, but the way that like everyone is complaining about the wise woman, there is that very clear distinction between the men and the village council on the one hand, and the women's council, whatever that is, on the other side. The circle of women on the other side, and that are basically opposites. It's like, I get this. It is written in a time of like very clear gender roles and whatnot, but I don't know. It makes me feel a bit queasy. We'll see how that will change in the future. I do appreciate Nynaeve, the village wisdom, a lot. It's like, yeah, you're actually trained for a job, and everyone is like pissed off because you're young and stuff like that. Yeah, yeah. Fucking punch him with your stick. I'm right behind you there on that one. And looking at how all those people are behaving, Nynaeve is also pretty much right to call them all fucking idiots. I'm with her on that one. All right, let's look at the other thing that I found really problematic, like actually problematic in this like first part, and that is whatever his name is, the peddler, something Fane. That dude. Because the first thing we see when he's described, he shows up, he's a traveling merchant peddler, which is, peddler is already kind of like, I mean, has a bit of a negative connotation, right? And then he's described as having a huge beak of a nose. And now, I know everyone else gets like very clear, like distinct physical descriptions, but the only peddler, the only one that has any comment made about his nose is the merchant. That's a cliche at its best. At its worst, it's an anti-Semitic cliche. And later on, we have someone make some more disparaging comments about our good master Fane, saying he's more raven than man, and when we just have heard that ravens are kind of fucking evil. And I'm not calling Robert Jordan an anti-Semite here. I just want to make this very, very clear. I'm just looking at the fact that someone that he's like apparently thinking of a hook-nosed guy that some people have like already think is evil as the first choice for the merchant showing up in the village, which shows that he's at least not has probably embodied those like anti-Semitic cliches that have stereotypes that have plagued people from like a Western tradition ever since, well, the Roman Empire and the Middle Ages, and is perpetuating them right now. Once again, it's just something that annoys me, that it is in here and it is so front and center. Now, obviously, Wheel of Time is not the only book that does this. A lot of books do this, and I'll call it out every time I'll see it somewhere. There's obviously also an argument to be made that there are anti-Semitic cliches in Lord of the Rings, if you want to look at it that way. I just feel obligated to actually point it out today. That description just like really irked me. And I'll keep an eye on more of those in the coming days to see if that's like a one-off or if there's more of that kind of thing in there. Because I feel it is important to point that out so we can get better and maybe avoid that if we all go and start writing our own like 14-part book series about annoying teenagers going on journeys somewhere, which hopefully we are not. At least if we do that, we should probably knock it off with the anti-Semitic cliches. Anyway, I think that's more or less all of the stuff that I noticed on these first 10 chapters. Everyone is now going out on the journey, fleeing the Trollocs, which obviously are orcs, and the Myrddraal, which is obviously a Nazgul, led by the Bene Gesserit and her bodyguard, going to Camelot, or no, to Avalon, actually. We'll see how all of that goes in the next video when I'll tackle the next part of their journey. Anyway, let me know what you think. Let me know your comments, your thoughts, your ideas, your rage, all of that below in the comments, and let's talk about it. If you haven't done so, do all the YouTube things, like, subscribe, do that bell thing or whatever, but mainly just like rage at me so we can talk about it. Anyway, have a good evening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Cheers.